Information Communications Technology (ICT) certainly infused numerous benefits to the teaching and learning process. Much more, ICT makes lessons more engaging and interactive. Beyond the opportunities ICT offers a career path, computer studies have also been found to improve learning for children. Lack of digital tools such as desktop computers, laptops, and all sorts in a computer class leaves one wondered the quality of teaching and learning of computer studies ongoing in the school. To ascertain the state of ICT education in the FCT, AD4 TV Radio visited some government-owned primary and junior secondary schools in the FCT, including the LEA Primary School, Peggy Layout of Kuje Area Council of the FCT.
In our class, they taught us about MS Word, how we operate the computer, and how to start up the computer. The teacher have not taken us to a laboratory, a computer lab. I don't have computer laboratory in my school.
That has been the experience of Enyanke Joseph, a primary 5 pupil of LEA Peggy Layout of Kuje Area Council. She longs to correspond her computer education knowledge to the reality that is beyond pictorial representation. Just like Enyanke, the over 500 pupils in this school do not have access to hands-on learning of computer studies. This, no doubt, has created huge knowledge gap between what the teacher teaches and the imaginary understanding of what is being taught through textbooks and drawings on the classroom boards. Miss Joseph's school does not own a single desktop computer, not even for the school headmaster, nor for administration purposes of the school. An authority of the school who spoke behind the cameras further confirmed Enyanke's claims on teaching and learning of ICT computer education in the primary school. He said lack of instructional materials has affected the school for years.
This is LEA Primary School, Buzunkuri in Kuje Area Council. Although the UBEP done a lot, this structure was built last year by UBEP and furnished by UBEP too. But we want them to still do more. ICT, this is era of computer. We have so many kids, children in this school, numbering more than 300 plus. We want computer lab. We don't have computer lab, as well as science lab. We want all these things in our schools in here. By the time we got this, the learning will be very easy for us and it will be easy for the children.
The 2010 annual report of the FCT Universal Basic Education Board confirmed that most of the FCT primary schools and junior secondary schools are lacking in computers for practices. AD4 TV visited the junior secondary school Buhari, where it was also observed that computer studies are mainly limited to theory. The National Policy on Education, as revised in 1988 and in 2004, requires teaching computer science as a discipline and integrating the same into school administration and instruction. The NPE further states that every level of the educational system, modern education techniques shall be increasingly used and will be improved on. However, this is not the reality in some FCT schools. A report by the Universal Basic Education Commission titled 2018 National Personnel Audit Report on Public and Private Basic Education Schools in Nigeria, released in October 2019, disclosed that only 3,609 computers are available to pupils in 63,798 public primary schools. AD4 TV was restricted from accessing the computer laboratories of some FCT schools in the city center, but these subject timetables obtained from some of the classrooms confirmed the subject is being taught at the schools. A source at the FCT Universal Basic Education Board, who pleaded anonymity, said insufficient funding has been responsible for the few numbers of computers cited across the schools.
Well, if we have just 300 set of computers in FCT schools, the whole of FCT schools, you definitely know that we don't have computers. And then if all the schools in FCT includes private schools, what it means is that most of the set will be in private schools and not in public schools. Because in some schools you see maybe 2, 3, 4 sets, and then this is a school that maybe probably have a population of over 500 students. So, and then some of them are being segmented. Maybe probably the only class they'll be teaching computer will be the senior class. Those who will not, who can actually look after the system. Maybe probably those are the people that they're teaching computer students. The other ones they will teach them just the little parts of computer while they were there. So it is quite disappointing that we have just that 300 set of computers when there are interventions every day for us to get it right, for us to digitalize our education. Although I don't know in terms of allocations, I don't know interventions rather. I don't know if UBEC gives any interventions to schools to procure computers. I am not aware of that, but if there is such thing, what it means is that it is the priorities of the schools that we should question, because most times you find out that these things are supposed to be according to needs assessment before they make provisions for interventions, but most schools go for things that they don't really need and ignore things that they should actually ask for. So the implication is that computer lesson is not actually going on in the FCT. So that's why you see most parents have to take their children to computer classes outside the school, so that they'll be able to have practical knowledge of what it means to learn computers. So I think the basic thing is that we should ask is that why are there no computers in schools, and we keep talking about digitalizing our education system? That's a very critical question to ask. If we have just this computer and the whole of FCT, then you can imagine outside the FCT, in states where the state government, the local government have to provide, or are supposed to be the ones intervening in schools. Definitely you know that it is more, what we'll have there will be more I don't know, more painful to say. So the implication will always be that students are not actually learning what they are supposed to learn when it comes to computer classes.
Join us as we examine issues of corruption affecting the standard of education in public schools in the Federal Capital Territory, Nigeria, at all levels of education, and the impact on the girl and boy child, people living with disabilities, women, and youth in general. Join Leaves on Worms on AD4 TV Radio, where government strategies on these critical areas and their impact on the lives of residents of the territory are x-rayed. Stay tuned on our channels weekly for this revealing program, jointly produced by AD4 TV Radio and Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism and supported by MacArthur Foundation.
We love AD4 TV Radio.
UBEC data on the availability of computer systems in FCT schools is very, very disheartening. I think it should have served as a wake-up call to authorities in FCT, because FCT schools are like model schools. If we can't get it right in the Federal Capital Territory, how can we get it right in other places in the country? So if schools in FCT do not have computer systems, how will you expect a school in a rural area far away in Cross River State to be able to afford one? So I think this is very disheartening. It is also an indictment on those in authority, because we know that allocations may have been made. Somebody may have sat on the allocation while the children suffer and the educational system continues to rot. So it is my opinion that as concerned parents and concerned citizens, those who are in authority in FCT should wake up and make sure that there is adequate provision of computer learning systems in the schools for these students to be able to have practical knowledge. We live in the 21st century where technology is the in thing. If we cannot get it right now, then we are not sure of the future.
Many schools in FCT, especially in the rural areas, do not have computers set for computer classes, and even in the urban areas, some just have few, just to show the students what it looked like, but the children do not have access to those computers to learn what they have been taught. So the implication is that teaching is taking place, but learning is not taking place, because students will only imagine what you are telling them. Oh, you sometimes you see teachers who draw set of keyboards on the board. This is what it looks like. This is the function of these keys. This is the function of that. But when the students are confronted with those things, they won't be able to do anything. But if we have a situation whereby during computer class, every student is to sit down before a computer set, as you are teaching them, they are practicalizing it. That way, learning will take place. When a child comes across a computer set somewhere else, he can easily say, oh, I know how to on a computer, I know how to go to Microsoft Word, I know how to make use of it, I know how to do all those things. But in a situation whereby what you do is just, you teach them in a class, it's just normal theoretical teaching, and believe me, learning will not take place. Students can just read what you give them back and give it back to you in the exam, but it doesn't mean that you can actually call them computer students.
The situation with FCT schools, public schools in FCT, teaching computer studies without computers with which students can learn, it's marks of unseriousness, frankly, but that is also a reflection of what we see happening generally in public schools across the country. Not only at the basic level, but this situation extends even to the university level, where students of engineering study engineering without being able to carry out practical application. Now, the effect of this is that the students will not be able to have any practical understanding. They will not be able to apply the knowledge that they learn. So it becomes more like a theoretical approach to computer learning, and the students will come out not knowing how to be able to apply those skills. I think one of the very important aspects of learning is when it is hands-on. And when students learn practical skills, it helps them to learn faster, and it helps them also to apply what they have learned in practical terms. But this is not the case with the schools in FCT, as the students do not have computers to study. This is actually very disheartening, and the government also has to do something in that direction. But we have always made this call to those in charge of providing these facilities, and very little has been done in that direction. There are just a few exceptions of the schools that you can find these facilities available, like the new schools that UBEC came up with, which are the smart schools. It is only in the smart schools, which is only one in each geopolitical zone, that you can find computers with which children can learn these skills.
Ku kasance tare da mu yayin da muke tattaunawa kan yadda matsalolin cin hanci da rashawa ya dabaibaye ingancin ilimi a makarantun gwamnati da ke birnin tarayya Abuja da ma Najeriya a matakan ilimi daban-daban, tasirin ilimin ga 'ya'ya mata da maza da ma masu bukata ta musamman, mata da matasa ma ba a bar su a baya ba. Kasance da kafar AD4 TV Radio don ilmantuwa kan manufofin gwamnati, tsare-tsare da ma yadda matakan aiwatar da su ke tasiri ko akasin haka. Yin tankaɗe da riraya na daga cikin abubuwan da muke baiwa muhimmanci. Ku tabbatar kun kasance da tashar mu ta AD4 TV Radio a kowane mako don sauraron wannan shiri. Bisa ɗaukar nauyin AD4 TV Radio da cibiyar Wole Soyinka da ke tallafawa binciken 'yan jaridu da tallafawar gidauniyar Makata.
The Youth Hub Education Program Officer, Peter Oga, responded as a one-time teacher in the FCT and an expert interrogating development in the education sector of the FCT. He described the experiences of pupils and students learning ICT in the Federal Capital Territory public schools as a drop in the ocean.
If you look at the delivery of ICT through computer studies, it is more or less like a drop in an ocean. If you look at, because again, if you look at the delivery of subjects like the one that we are discussing, one of the things that teachers strongly rely on are resource materials, textbooks that are available to administer or teach these subjects. If you look at some of our computer science textbooks, ICT is just like a small drop in the entire textbook. So teachers do little or nothing if you want to look at the quality of learning that should happen during that process. It's just a touch of what we consider ICT as against what is obtainable in other climes. And by other climes, I would even be bold to say countries within our continent, because sometimes when we compare what we have against countries like the United States and the rest, people would consider it that we are just exaggerating. Yeah. So, but again, if you look at even within the continent, if you go to, for instance, Rwanda, if you go to, for instance, Kenya, you see that so much is going into the teaching of ICT within and from that basic education level. When I have the opportunity of having these conversations like we are having now, one of the backgrounds I also try to lay is that learning is usually built on each other, and by that I mean learning would usually happen from simple to complex. I feel strongly that at that basic education level, which is the foundation of learning, so much attention, so much investment should go into the teaching of ICT at that level, so that children are well grounded and able to take forward whatever learnings they have acquired at that level.
He identified the missing block building, which validates learning from the foundation to complex stages. For Oga, the lack of the instructional materials is as a result of misappropriation of funds by the authorities of the Federal Capital Territory.
I have had conversations with people within the space that will tell you certain donor agencies have at some point delivered interventions within certain schools, especially around provision of ICT materials, resources within those schools. And what school administrators do is they just lock up buildings or rooms that houses some of these resources. And their reason for doing this, quote and unquote, is for the children not to damage them. I think that is rather unfortunate. And that answers the question that if you look inward and you are able to investigate further, you might be surprised that we have those resources, but they are not put into good use. And it's unfortunate, like I've mentioned. Again, not also to excuse that government also on their part needs to invest more in providing those resources for our public schools, for instance. And my interest will always lie with and in the public schools, because, of course, it's usually the place for the ordinary man, the school where the child of the ordinary man would attend because that's what their parents will be able to afford. I think their government needs to heighten and expand and increase intervention that will be able to provide those resources for teaching and learning within the school. And I also think that for schools that have the interventions already, it's important that they are allowed to be utilized by the students. If you have conversation with people, they'll tell you if you build a house, a fine house, and you leave it unused for a long time, it will still get spoiled, right? So as far as these resources are concerned, if they are just left there without being put to use, somehow they eventually get spoiled or they go out of relevance. Yeah, they go out of relevance.
To Mr. Oga, there are no options to deliberate investment in instructional materials for use for the children of common and average Nigeria who resides in the Federal Capital Territory. He identified failure of this on the path of those responsible for aggregating school needs.
Those that are responsible for aggregating school needs within the FCT also needs to pay attention to some of these emerging issues. Emerging issue for me would be how well for instance, issues around climate change, issues around skills, very vital skills acquisition, issues around ICT, and I strongly emphasize ICT. How do they find their way into our curriculum? How do we ensure that they are adequately budgeted for in terms of teaching and learning, and even the provision of the resources that will enable both teaching and learning. I think that, yeah, for FCT, we have not done very well. And the reason why I will continue to stay on we have not done very well is because I try to look at FCT holistically. If you go to schools within Asokoro, like I've earlier established, if you go to schools in Garki, you would find out some of those schools are even doing better than some private schools, right? So if you live there with that understanding that schools within the FCT are doing very well, you'll be very, very wrong, and you'll be judging the schools and how basic education is being delivered within the FCT wrongly.
Again, concerns on the reoccurring abysmal challenge of budgeting for public basic schools in the FCT is here. The Youth Hub Education Program Officer speaks to the shrouded nature of what was supposed to be an open working document, the budget, for all stakeholders.
For FCT especially, budgeting is a big issue. And let me lay the foundation. Before we now have the current FCT minister in person of Barrister Nyesom Wike. Before now, budget in FCT used to be shielded with a lot of secrecy. You know, when you want to engage stakeholders on budget-related issues, they consider you an alien, like you are coming to spotlight and touchlight how they are spending public funds, you know, and the likes. I know that as until 2023 or so, FCT was implementing a 2022 budget in 2023. In fact, it got to a point where the National Assembly had to force relevant committees, the FCT committees, to ensure that their budget for a particular year was ready in just a few weeks. Yeah, that's to tell you how much we have not done well in terms of appropriation for the FCT, and in terms of even in terms of appropriation for public school for education within the FCT. Again, a big issue that we also need to look at, especially for the FCT, and I'm speaking as someone that have had that engagement with government and even with the schools. There's also that issue about what has been appropriated for and what was eventually released. So if you engage with the relevant authorities that are responsible for implementing basic education within the FCT, they'll tell you, okay, so what you see on paper as what was voted or appropriated for this purpose was not eventually what was released. So that's another issue. And again, that aside, I think that those that are responsible for aggregating school needs within the FCT also needs to pay attention to some of these emerging issues. Emerging issue for me would be how well, for instance, issues around climate change, issues around skills, very vital skills acquisition, issues around ICT, and I strongly emphasize ICT. How do they find their way into our curriculum? How do we ensure that they are adequately budgeted for in terms of teaching and learning, and even the provision of the resources that will enable both teaching and learning.
Bringing this episode of Leaves and Worms to a close on teaching and learning of computer education in FCT schools, confirmations, reports and responses from stakeholders has fully confirmed that lack of funding and commitment have significantly contributed to the poor state of ICT education in government-owned primary and junior secondary schools of the Federal Capital Territory.